The bolt would not come loose. Dara had been fighting it for 20 minutes. The iron thruster lay open on her workbench like a gutted fish, and this one stripped bolt, this single, stubborn, useless piece of metal, was the reason she had not gone to lunch, the reason her left knuckle was bleeding, and the reason she was now speaking to it in a low, steady voice that would have made most people on the station walk away quickly. She was not yelling. Dara never yelled. Yelling was what people did when they had already given up. She simply spoke to the bolt in the tone of someone explaining, very clearly, what was going to happen to it. The workshop around her was exactly the way she liked it, tools in rows on the pegboard, parts sorted by type in labeled bins, no clutter on the floor, no chairs that did not belong. The overhead light was bright and white, and it lit up every corner of the room with the kind of honesty that showed every scratch on the workbench and every faded marking on the floor where she had taped out zones for different jobs. It was not pretty. It was not meant to be. It was a place where things got fixed, and that was enough. She had been on Frontier Station Callum for 4 years, and in those 4 years, her workshop had never once surprised her. That was about to change. The door at the side of the workshop opened without a knock. That meant it was Rono. Nobody else on the station walked into her workshop without knocking. Rono did it because he had decided, a long time ago, that their friendship made the rules different for him. She had never told him he was wrong, which he took as agreement. He leaned against the doorframe with a food packet in one hand, and the look on his face that meant something interesting had happened somewhere on the station, and he was deciding how to tell her about it. The Velkin shuttle had a problem docking, he said. I heard, she said. She did not look up from the bolt. One of their companion creatures got loose. She paused. How loose? Station loose. It's in the corridors somewhere. The Velkin are calm about it. They say the creature will find somewhere safe on its own. He paused. They also said something about a bond, but I didn't fully understand it. Their translator was doing that thing where it picks the closest word in our language and it's never quite right. Dara set down her wrench. She had dealt with Velkin twice before, a trade stop 3 years ago and a medical resupply last winter. They were careful, quiet people with long memories and a set of customs that were very important to them and very confusing to everyone else. What kind of creature? She asked. Small, Rono said. Like a lizard but with wings, about the size of your hand. She picked the wrench back up. Close the outer corridor hatch when you leave. I don't want something loose from an alien shuttle wandering into my parts bins. Rono nodded and left. She went back to the bolt. She did not hear anything. There was no sound of wings, no scrape of claws on metal, no rustle of movement in the vents. One moment the workshop was empty except for her, and the next moment there was a small warm weight on her left shoulder, and when she turned her head, she was looking directly into 2 very large eyes the color of deep amber, set in a face smaller than her fist. The creature was extraordinary. She could see that even in the first second. Its scales were the dark blue-green of deep water, and they caught the light from the overhead lamp and threw it back in shifting colors of purple at one angle, gold at another. Its wings were folded flat against its back, thin as paper, the same dark color but translucent at the edges. It had 4 small legs, a tail that curled around her shoulder with a grip that was gentle but definite, and a face that was watching her with an expression she could not name. It was not afraid. That was the first thing she noticed. It had chosen her shoulder specifically, had landed there on purpose, and it sat as though it had decided this was simply where it belonged. She stared at it. It stared at her. Then something happened that she had no word for. A pulse of light moved through the creature's scales, starting at its chest and flowing outward to the tips of its wings and the end of its tail. The light was soft and blue-white, like the glow from a welding arc seen through frosted glass. It lasted only a second, and then it faded, and the creature let out a sound like a very small bell rung once. Dara sat very still. She was not a person who panicked. She was a person who gathered information and then acted on it. So she did not shove the creature off her shoulder, and she did not call for help yet. She simply looked at it and it looked at her, and neither of them moved for a moment. Then she reached for her comm and called Rono. "It found me," she said. There was a silence on the other end. The creature. "Yes." Another silence. "I'll tell the Velkin." The Velkin came quickly, 3 of them in their long gray coats, moving through the station corridors with the unhurried speed of people who know exactly what they are doing. Their names were long, and their translator rendered them as titles more than names. The one who spoke was the eldest, a tall person with silver markings on their hands and the careful expression of someone about to deliver news. They looked at the creature on Dara's shoulder. They looked at each other. The eldest spoke to the translator for a moment, and the translator said, "The spark bond is complete." Dara said, "What does that mean?" It took 10 minutes to explain. The short version was this. The creature, called Pip, or the closest sound to its Velkin name that the translator could manage, was a companion animal of great importance in Velkin culture. Velkin companion creatures chose their bonded person through a biological process involving a pulse of bioluminescent light, a transfer of recognition chemicals, and something the translator called a spark of chosen belonging, which Rono later said sounded like the fanciest way anyone had ever described getting attached to someone. The bond, once made, was permanent by Velkin law. Pip was now, officially and unambiguously, Dara's. "I did not agree to this," Dara said. The eldest looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. Pip agreed. "Under our law, that is sufficient. To refuse the bond would dishonor the choosing." A pause. "It would also constitute a diplomatic incident of considerable severity." Commander Addis arrived 12 minutes later, having been briefed by the time she walked through the door. She looked at Dara. She looked at Pip, who was still on Dara's shoulder, and had at some point decided to examine Dara's ear with intense scientific interest. "You are keeping the dragon," Addis said. "It was not a question." "Apparently," Dara said. Addis nodded, made a note on her comm, and left. She was a practical person. The Velkin gave Dara a small supply pouch with information on Pip's diet and a list of things that Pip found frightening, of which there were very few. They bowed and returned to their shuttle. Rono stayed. He was leaning on the workbench again, watching Pip, who had now moved from Dara's shoulder to the top of her head and appeared to be inspecting her hair. "You have a dragon," he said. "I am aware," Dara said. "A tiny dragon." "I can see that. That bonded with you out of an entire station full of people." Dara reached up carefully and lifted Pip from her head and held the creature up to look at it face to face. Pip looked back with those amber eyes, calm and completely without apology for anything that had happened in the last hour. Dara carried Pip into the workshop and placed her gently on the highest clear shelf, out of the way of the tools and the parts bins. She put a spare bolt on the shelf beside Pip, because she didn't have anything else, and she thought maybe it would give the creature something to do. Then she went back to the workbench and picked up her wrench. Pip sat on the shelf. She picked up the bolt with 2 small claws. She turned it over. She sniffed it. She set it down very carefully, the way someone sets down a thing they have decided matters. And she watched Dara work with those large amber eyes and did not look away. 3 nights after Pip arrived, Dara made the mistake of sleeping. She did not think of it as a mistake at the time. She had been awake for nearly 20 hours finishing a hull patch job on a freighter that was leaving at first light. She had eaten standing up, washed her hands twice, and sat down on the cot she kept in the corner of the back room for long jobs. She had looked over at Pip, who was curled in a small neat circle on the shelf, wings folded, eyes closed, making the very faint sound of something dreaming about something very small. Dara had closed her eyes. That was the mistake. She woke 7 hours later to silence, which was normal, and a smell that was not. It was sharp and chemical and familiar in the way that something is familiar when you know what it is, but cannot immediately understand why you are smelling it here. She sat up. She knew that smell. It was hallmarking paint. For 2 seconds she sat completely still, the way a person sits when the information arriving from their senses does not yet match anything their brain is willing to accept. Then she stood up and walked into the main workshop. She stopped in the doorway. On the floor in front of her workbench were 14 small red shapes. They were not precise. The lines were wobbly and the sizes were uneven, and 2 of them looked more like ovals than anything else. But they were, unmistakably, hearts. 14 of them in a winding trail from the workshop door to the base of her workbench, painted on the gray floor in hallmarking red. In the middle of the trail sat Pip. Pip was covered in paint. Her front claws were red. Her chin was red. There was a smear of red across her left wing that she had clearly not noticed yet. She was sitting with her tail wrapped around her feet and her head tilted at a small angle, looking up at Dara with the expression of someone waiting for a response to something they are very confident about. Dara looked at the hearts. She looked at Pip. She looked at the open canister of hallmarking red on the shelf behind Pip, which Pip had somehow, and Dara still did not know how, gotten down from the cabinet where it lived with the other marking paints. The cap was on the floor 6 inches away. The brush she used for detailed marking work was laid beside the canister, and its bristles were red. Dara took a long breath. Then she said in a very level voice, "Pip." Pip's tail began to wag. It was a small motion at first, just the tip, tapping against the floor, and then the whole tail was moving, slow and steady, and Pip let out a low sound that was somewhere between a hum and a purr, and was clearly the Velkin small creature equivalent of yes, hello, I did this, are you pleased? Dara was not pleased. She was also not going to pretend she had not stood in the doorway for a full 30 seconds before saying anything, because the trail of hearts was, in some objective sense, the most unexpected thing she had ever seen in her workshop, and there was a part of her brain that was simply busy processing that before the rest of her brain could catch up with how she was supposed to feel about it. She cleaned it up. She was careful and thorough about it, the way she was careful and thorough about everything. The paint had dried to the point where it needed a solvent cloth, which she applied to all 14 hearts in sequence, working from the door inward. She capped the canister and put it back in the cabinet, and she moved the marking brushes to a different cabinet higher up and latched it. Then she turned around, and Pip had already found the backup canister. Dara had not known there was a backup canister. Pip had, apparently, done a more thorough survey of the workshop in one night than Dara had done in 4 years. The backup canister was smaller, and the paint inside it was a darker red, closer to brown, and Pip had not managed to get the brush but had gotten the canister open and was holding it in both front claws and staring into it with the deep concentration of a scientist who has just discovered something fundamental about the universe. "No," Dara said. Pip looked up. "No," Dara said again, and she walked over and took the canister very gently from Pip's claws, because she had read the information the Velkin gave her, and she knew that grabbing or startling a Velkin companion animal was something the information described as not recommended in text that clearly wanted to say something much stronger. Pip watched the canister go. Her ears, small, flat, pressed close to her head, normally went down slightly. Her tail stopped wagging. She made a very small sound. Dara capped the canister. She set it on a high shelf. She looked at Pip. Pip was still making the small sound. It was not a sound of distress exactly. It was more the sound of someone who had been very much looking forward to something and was now not going to get it, and was trying to decide how to feel about that. That was when Dara sat down on the floor of her workshop, which she never did, and thought about what she actually knew. She knew the Velkin had given her a long document. She had read parts of it. She had meant to read all of it and had not yet. She opened the document on her comm and searched the word paint. There was nothing about paint. She searched the word art. There was a section. It was 2 pages long. She read it standing in the middle of the workshop with the comm in one hand and Pip sitting 3 feet away, watching her face the way you watch someone read something about you. Section said this: Velkin companion creatures are by nature communicators. Because they cannot speak and cannot write in any form that most species recognize, they express themselves through physical marking. In early Velkin settlements, companion creatures were observed leaving marks scratched into soft earth, pressed into clay, drawn in ash, in spaces occupied by their bonded person. Study of these marks across 400 years of Velkin recorded history has revealed that they are not random. Companion creatures mark territory in specific shapes with specific meanings, and the most common mark, found in records from every period and every region, is a simple closed curve, symmetric, pointed at the top, round at the bottom. Dara looked up at Pip. Pip was watching her. The section continued. This mark is produced specifically in spaces the companion animal considers important, in relation to individuals it considers important. It is not decoration. It is a declaration. It means, this place is good. This person is mine. Anyone who passes through here should know that someone who belongs here has been loved. The workshop was quiet. The overhead light was bright and white. The floor was clean. Everything was in its place. Dara stood very still for a long moment. Then she reached up and opened the cabinet where she had put the first canister and took it back down. She set it on the lowest shelf, where Pip could reach it. She uncapped it. She set the marking brush beside it. She said nothing. She went back to the workbench and picked up the work she'd left from last night and started on it again. Behind her, she heard the faint sound of a brush being lifted, and the very small, focused sound of something working with great care and great happiness. She did not look. She did not need to. By the end of the first week, the hearts were on the workbench. By the end of the second week, they were on the tool rack, the parts bins, the side wall, and Dara was still not sure of the exact method, the ceiling above her cot in the back room. She had made a critical error in the first days and she understood it now. The error was cleaning up the original 14 hearts. She had done it out of habit because she kept a clean workshop and paint on the floor was paint on the floor, same as any other spill. She had not thought about what Pip would conclude from this. What Pip concluded was, not enough hearts. The logic from Pip's side appeared to be simple and absolute. The hearts she made had disappeared. The solution was more hearts in more places so that they could not all disappear at once, so that some of them would always remain, so that the message they were sending would be permanent and clear and impossible to miss. This was, from Pip's perspective, excellent strategy. From Dara's perspective, it was a full renegotiation of what her workshop was. She cleaned the workbench hearts. Pip watched this happen with a calm expression and immediately repainted them when Dara's back was turned. Dara cleaned them again. Pip did not seem to view this as a conflict. She seemed to view it as a collaborative project where each of them had a role. By the third cleaning, Dara sat down on her work stool and did not get back up for several minutes. Rono arrived on a Thursday, or what counted for Thursday on a station that didn't technically have a week, carrying 2 mugs of something hot from the station canteen. He walked through the open workshop door, stopped, and stood still for what Dara counted as 11 full seconds. The workbench had 19 hearts on it. The pegboard behind the tools had 6, painted carefully around the tools so that the tools could still be removed. The parts bins had hearts on their lids, small enough that the labels were still readable. The floor had a cluster near the door and a loose trail along the left wall. "Oh," Rono said. "Don't," Dara said. "I wasn't going to say anything." "You were about to." He came in and put one of the mugs on the clear corner of the workbench. the only surface Pip had not marked yet, which Dara had been defending with some vigilance, and sat on the stool she kept for visitors. He looked around with the slow expression of a person who is making memories on purpose. "It's actually quite nice," he said. Dara gave him a look. "I mean the color," he said. "It's a good red, it's consistent, she has steady hands for something that small." He paused. Claws, steady claws. Pip was on top of the tool rack, very close to the ceiling, adding something to the upper right corner with the focused gravity of a person finishing a long and important project. She was using the small brush she preferred, thinner than the hallmarking brushes, slightly bent at the tip from the time she had used it to investigate a gap behind the cabinet, and her tail was curled around the rack for balance. "I tried talking to her about it," Dara said. "Simple words, slow, clear. I pointed at the walls. I pointed at my tools. I said this is where we work. I said not everything is for painting. I used the word no at least 8 times. And she listened to the whole thing. She looked right at me the whole time. And then when I turned around, she put a heart on the back of my jacket." Rono pressed his lips together in the way that meant he was not going to laugh, and was finding this decision very difficult. "It's still there," Dara said. "On the jacket. I decided leaving it was simpler than the conversation." She had tried, finally, to contact the Velkin diplomatic contact that the station's administration had given her, a name in the long format that the translator rendered as something like Keeper of Small Bonds, which Rono said sounded like a job title he would enjoy having. The contact had been prompt and genuinely interested in the update. The conversation had gone in a direction Dara had not expected. She told them about the painting. She told them it was everywhere. She asked, with the patience of someone who has been replacing solvent cloths every second day, whether there was a way to redirect this behavior, or to set limits, or to explain to Pip that some surfaces were for work and some were not. The Keeper of Small Bonds had listened to all of this. Then they had asked several questions. Was the paint applied to objects that Dara used regularly? Was it placed at entrances and along paths that Dara walked? Was it on items Dara touched with her hands? Yes, yes, and yes. The Keeper of Small Bonds had been quiet for a moment. Then they said something that the translator took 3 attempts at, because the concept did not map cleanly into any human language, and what they arrived at, after those 3 attempts, was approximately this. When a Velkin companion creature marks a space, they are not decorating it, they are protecting it. They are telling every other creature that passes through, every alien, every stranger, every unknown presence that this space is already claimed by love. The marks are not for the bonded person. The marks are for everyone else. They are a warning and a welcome at the same time. They say, someone here has been chosen. Come in with respect or do not come in. Dara ended the call and sat in the workshop for a while by herself. The hearts were on the workbench and the tool rack and the walls and the ceiling. The workshop smelled faintly of paint and metal and the slightly sweet smell that Pip produced when she was warm and content. The overhead light made all the red marks look vivid and deliberate, and in some way that Dara was unwilling to examine too closely. Not wrong. She was a practical person. She thought about practical things. She thought about the solvent cloths she had been using and the time it took to clean the paint, and the fact that every time she cleaned it, Pip simply made more. She thought about the back of her jacket, where she had not cleaned the heart, and where she now admitted to herself she was not going to clean it. She looked over at Pip, who had come down from the tool rack and was now sitting on the workbench, considering the clear corner with the expression of someone making a decision. "Don't," Dara said. Pip looked at her. Dara pointed at the corner. "That corner is mine." Pip looked at the corner. Then she looked back at Dara. Then, very slowly and very deliberately, she raised one paint-tipped claw. "Pip!" The claw touched the corner. A single small heart, neat and careful, went down in the exact center of the space. Pip sat back and looked at Dara with an expression that was not defiance. It was something much simpler than defiance. It was certainty. It was the expression of someone who has just done the most obvious thing in the world and does not understand why anyone would see it any other way. Dara looked at the heart. She picked up her mug. She took a drink. She looked at the heart for a little longer. "Fine," she said quietly, to no one in particular, and went back to work. Dara left her workshop door open on warm days. She had always done this. The station's ventilation was good but not perfect, and the workshop generated heat from the machinery and the welding work, and an open door let the air move. She had never thought about it as an invitation. It was not an invitation. It was thermoregulation. But the door had always been open before Pip, and no one had ever stopped to look inside. The workshop was at the end of a secondary corridor, not a main route, not near the canteen or the docking offices or anywhere that people had reason to pass unless they needed something fixed. People came when they had a job. They left when the job was done. That was how it had always worked. After Pip, people started stopping. It was gradual at first. A trader from the West Dock who was passing through on the way to the parts exchange paused in the corridor, looked in through the open door and stood there for a moment. Dara noticed but said nothing. The trader left. 2 days later, a different person stopped. Then 3. Then, on a Tuesday, or the station's version of Tuesday, Dara looked up from a wiring job to find 4 beings standing in her doorway in a loose cluster, looking at her workshop with varying expressions. She said, "Can I help you?" It was not a question. She said it the way you say something when you want the situation to explain itself. One of them, a human supply clerk named Brett, who Dara had spoken to maybe twice, said, "We just heard about the dragon." Pip was on the tool rack, adding a heart to a section of wall she had previously left unmarked. She paused and looked at the group in the doorway. Then she returned to her work with the air of someone who does not consider being observed a problem. The group watched for a moment and then dispersed. Dara went back to the wiring. Rono came by that afternoon and said the workshop had become, and he was using his exact words here, a point of interest. "That is not what I want," Dara said. "I know, but the story got around." He sat on the visitor's stool. "You have to understand how it sounds from outside. The Velkin companion animal that no one had ever managed to bond with, and apparently there were 7 years of attempts, which I did not know, chose a human mechanic at the far end of a secondary corridor who was in the middle of fighting a stuck bolt." "I was not fighting it," Dara said. "I was working methodically toward a solution." "Right, and the creature chose you. And then you took her home and she covered your workshop in hearts and you let her. And now you have a workshop that looks like," he glanced at the walls, "like someone had a very strong opinion about a color." "The red is a standard hallmarking shade," Dara said. "There is nothing unusual about it." "There are over 200 of them," Rono said. "I counted." There was a pause. "I did not ask you to count," she said. "I know, I did it voluntarily." He looked around again. "It's a good workshop, Dara. People respect the work. But now people are talking about something else too, and it is not bad talking." It started reaching her in small ways. A HFY cargo captain she had done a whole job for 2 months ago stopped her in the main corridor and gave her a nod, a deep, deliberate one, not the quick acknowledgement that people give strangers, but the kind that means something specific. The HFY were not a warm species in any sense that humans usually recognized. They were formal and precise, and they sorted people into categories and stuck to those categories. She had been in the category of useful service provider. The nod meant she had moved. She asked Rono about it. Rono looked it up. It took him 2 days to find a cultural source he trusted, and another day to confirm it with the HFY trader, who ran the general goods stall near the docking offices. He came back with the information written in his personal shorthand on a scrap of printed paper, because Rono was the only person on the station who still used printed notes. The HFY word, he said, translated most closely as heart-marked. It was a status, not just a description. Among the HFY and among several other species whose naming he had also found but was not going to attempt to pronounce, there was a very old concept that a person who had been chosen by a creature capable of genuine loyalty was someone who had demonstrated, not performed, not claimed, but demonstrated that they were worth choosing. It could not be argued or explained into existence. The creature either chose or it did not. Dara had been chosen by a creature that had not chosen anyone in 7 years. "They're calling you heart-marked," Rono said. "The HFY and at least 2 other species docked here right now have a version of that idea. You won't hear it directly most of the time, but you'll see it." She saw it. A crew from a passing research vessel who she had never met held a corridor door for her and waited, which was not something strangers did in busy station corridors. A Velkin docking officer she had not spoken to since the shuttle incident gave her a small formal bow when they passed each other. The kind that, Rono later confirmed, was reserved for people the Velkin considered honored companions. The Velkin food trader near the East Wing started adding a small extra item to her orders and refusing payment for it, and looking somewhere else when she tried to object. Commander Addis called her in. Dara sat in the chair across from Addis's desk in the administrative block, with the prepared expression of someone who is not certain what is about to happen and is not going to show that uncertainty. Addis folded her hands on the desk. "I have had a formal communication from the Velkin diplomatic office," she said, "about you and the companion animal. I assumed." "They are pleased," Addis said. "Considerably pleased." The creature, she checked her notes, Pip, had not bonded in 7 years. There was apparently concern that she would not bond at all. A Velkin companion animal that never bonds is, the translation is not clean, something like an incomplete thing. Not a failure, but not whole. She looked up. "You changed that." Dara said nothing. "I'm not going to make a large matter of this," Addis said. "I know you would not want that, but you should know that your position on the station has improved in ways that have nothing to do with your work, which was already the best here." A pause. "You should also know that the Velkin have offered to extend the diplomatic trade arrangement by 3 additional years and have cited your presence as a factor." Dara absorbed this information. "Can I go back to work?" she said. Addis allowed something close to a smile. "Yes." She walked back through the station to the secondary corridor and into the workshop. It was mid-afternoon and the light was good, and the air was moving through the open door. Pip was on the high shelf above the parts bins, curled in her resting position, asleep, with the tip of her tail over her nose and her wings folded so neatly they barely seemed to be there. Dara stood in the middle of the workshop and looked around at it. The hearts were on the workbench, and the walls and the ceiling and the tool rack and the parts bins and the back of her jacket and the side of her favorite wrench. And she had only noticed this recently, the underside of the workbench, which meant Pip had gone under there at some point when Dara was not watching. She had been chosen. She had not asked to be. She had not been remarkable or kind or especially welcoming. She had been at her workbench fighting a bolt, and this small creature had landed on her shoulder and decided, with the total confidence of something that knows its own mind completely, that she was the person. Dara reached up and put one finger against the small heart on her favorite wrench. She did not do anything with it. She did not clean it. She just touched it for a second, the way you touch something to confirm it is real. Then she went back to work. It was a routine supply update that caused the problem. Not a crisis, not an accident, just a line in a document that Dara almost did not read. She reviewed supply manifests every 2 weeks as a matter of habit, checking that what she had ordered matched what had arrived, and that the quantities of things she used regularly were where she expected them to be. It was not interesting work. It was the kind of work that kept a workshop running without emergencies, and she had been doing it long enough that she could move through a manifest in 20 minutes without her mind fully engaging. She had been at it for 15 minutes when the line stopped her. It was under the hallmarking products section, and it was a safety note that had been added to the most recent product update. It said, in dry administrative language, that extended or repeated contact between hallmarking compounds and certain biological surface types, specifically scale-based skin structures found in several reptilian and near-reptilian species, had been observed to cause scale irritation and, in prolonged cases, damage to the underlying skin layer. Dara read the line twice. Then she set down the manifest and looked at Pip. Pip was on the workbench, 3 feet away, in the middle of adding a heart to the side of a small engine casing that Dara had left out for a job tomorrow. Pip's front claws were red with paint. They had been red with paint, to varying degrees, every single day for the past 3 weeks. Dara got up from her stool. She crossed the workshop and picked up the product data sheet for the hallmarking red, the one she kept in the documents folder on the cabinet beside the paint supplies, because she kept data sheets for everything she used and had done so for years. She read the full chemical composition. She looked up the components she did not immediately know. She cross-referenced them with the biological data document the Velkin had given her at the start, the long one she had still not finished reading. By the time she had what she needed, she had been standing at the cabinet for 40 minutes, and the engine casing had acquired 3 more hearts. The relevant section of the Velkin document was near the end, in a part she had not reached. It said that Velkin companion creature scales were sensitive to certain chemical families, and it listed them, and 2 of those chemical families were present in hallmarking paint. The document said the effects were not immediate. It said they built up with repeated exposure. It said that in the early stages, the damage was invisible. Pip's scales looked fine. They were as vivid and iridescent as they had been the day she arrived. But they had been fine 3 weeks ago, and the exposure had been happening every day since. Dara put the document down on the cabinet and stood still for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. She was not a person who became emotional about things quickly. She was a person who identified a problem and solved it. She held these 2 facts about herself firmly, because the alternative to holding them firmly was to spend 5 minutes thinking about the fact that she had spent 3 weeks being gently irritated about paint on her workshop walls, while Pip was quietly being harmed by the paint she was using, and that was not a productive thing to spend time thinking about. She went to work. The first step was finding a replacement. She needed something that Pip could use on skin and scales without harm, that would produce a mark on surfaces like the workshop walls and floor and tools, that would last long enough to serve the purpose Pip intended for it, and that she could make or source on a station with specific and limited supplies. She started with what the station had. She pulled up the full supply manifest, not just the sections she used but all of it, and searched for anything in the biological or medical or research categories that was safe for reptilian biology. She found 3 candidates. She ordered samples from the station's supply office, which required a conversation with a clerk who wanted to know what they were for, and who eventually stopped asking questions when Dara reached a certain point in her explanation. The samples arrived in 2 days. She spent a 3rd day testing them on small sections of wall and floor and metal casing, looking at adhesion, coverage, drying time, and durability. 2 of the 3 did not stay on the surfaces long enough. The 3rd stayed. But the color was weak, a pale pink that disappeared against the gray walls in anything less than direct light. She needed something better. She spent a night doing chemistry. It was not her primary skill area, but it was not entirely foreign to her either. She had done enough materials work and enough compound mixing for specialist repair jobs that she understood the principles. She took the 3rd candidate compound as a base. She looked at what made it weak on surfaces and worked out that the adhesive component was too thin at room temperature. She found 2 other compounds in the station stores, one a sealant used in hull work, one a suspension agent used in cleaning products. And she worked out, with a significant amount of calculation and 3 ruined test batches, a ratio that made the base compound adhere properly without changing its safety profile. Then she had a different problem, which was color. The original paint was red, and the original red had meant something to Pip, had been the first color she used, the one she kept returning to, the one that covered the workshop in 240-something marks. Dara needed something that was at least close to that red, and the base compound was beige. She looked at what produced the color in biological safe pigments and found in the medical supply section of the manifest a set of tracer dyes used in certain kinds of scan preparation. They were non-toxic, approved for contact with skin, and they came in a range of colors. She took the red one. She tested the ratio. On the fourth attempt, she got a compound that was close to the right red, dried properly on multiple surfaces, and adhered well enough to last a week without significant fatting. She sat back and looked at the result. Then she thought about something else. She had been working for 2 days and she had been focused the whole time, and in that focus, she had almost missed the fact that she had been given an opportunity rather than just a problem. The original paint was flat and opaque. There was no reason the replacement had to be. She went back to the dye section of the manifest and found that 2 of the tracer dyes had bioluminescent properties. They absorbed ambient light and released it slowly, which was used in the medical context because it made certain body structures easier to image in low light conditions. The red dye was one of them. Dara mixed the final compound in a small clean container, the same size as the original hull-marking canisters. She let it settle for an hour. Then she turned off the workshop's main overhead light and checked the result in the dimness. The compound glowed. Softly, steadily, not bright enough to be startling but bright enough to see clearly, the same deep red, but lit from within, the way an ember looks when the fire around it has calmed down but the heat is still there. She turned the light back on. She put a clean brush beside the container. She put both of them on the low shelf where Pip's painting things lived. Then she sat down on her stool and waited. Pip found it within minutes. She came down from the high shelf where she had been resting and approached the container the way she approached all new things, cautiously, circling slightly, sniffing twice. She put one claw on the container and tilted it and looked at the compound inside. She lifted the brush. She held it in both claws and looked at it. Then she dipped the brush into the compound and held the loaded brush up and watched the way the glow moved and shifted as the compound sat on the bristles. Dara watched Pip's face. The expression she saw was one she did not have a name for. It was not excitement exactly, though the tail was already moving. It was something more fundamental than excitement. It was the expression of someone who has been given the thing they were already doing, but better, who has been seen and accommodated and handed back their own purpose in an improved form. Pip looked at Dara. Dara said nothing. She picked up the work she had set aside and bent over it. Behind her, she heard the soft sound of a brush touching a surface, and then another, and then a rhythm that was quick and steady and happy. By the time she went to the back room to sleep, Pip had covered the entire left wall in glowing hearts. In the dark, they pulsed very faintly, like breathing. Dara looked at the wall for a moment before she closed her eyes. She decided she did not mind sleeping in a room that glowed red. She decided this very quickly, in the way that people decide things they have already known for some time. A year is a long time on a space station. Things change. Ships come and go. Crew rotations happen. Faces appear in the corridors and then disappear and are replaced by new ones. The station itself does not change much. The corridors are the same. The docking bays are the same. The canteen serves the same 5 things it has always served and probably always will. But the people in it are always shifting, always arriving or leaving, always bringing their own history and leaving parts of it behind when they go. In a year, Frontier Station Callum had acquired a new docking manager, lost 2 supply ships to route changes, and gained a minor reputation across 4 trade networks for something that had nothing to do with its services or its location or its trade rates. It had, in the words of a cargo hauler who had mentioned it to another cargo hauler, who had mentioned it to a supply coordinator, who had put it in a route note that got read by someone at a fuel depot 3 systems away. A workshop with hearts on everything, and a dragon, and a mechanic who did the best engine work in the sector. The hearts came first in the description, usually. Dara was aware of this. She was not entirely comfortable with it, but she was aware of it, and she had stopped being actively bothered by it somewhere around month 6, which she considered reasonable progress. It was a gray afternoon, gray in the sense that the station's lighting was on its afternoon cycle, cooler and softer than the midday white, when a young technician named Fenn arrived on Frontier Station Callum for the first time. Fenn was 23, recently certified, nervous in the specific way that people are nervous when they have gotten a posting that felt bigger than they expected, and they are still deciding whether that is good or not. He had been assigned to general technical support under Rono's team, and had been on the station for approximately 6 hours before someone in the canteen told him to go look at the workshop at the end of Corridor 14. He found the corridor. He found the door, which was open. It was almost always open now, even in the cooler cycles, because Pip had communicated through sustained and patient effort that she preferred it open, and Dara had eventually stopped arguing about it. He stopped in the doorway and looked in. He stood there for a long time. The workshop was lit by the overhead light and by its own walls. That was the only way to describe it. Every surface in the room, the walls, the workbench, the tool rack, the parts bins, the ceiling, the floor along the edges, was covered in marks that glowed red. They were heart shapes, all of them, in different sizes and in no particular order but in no random arrangement either. They covered the space the way something covers a space when it has been put there over a very long period of time, by someone who always knew exactly where each one belonged. The effect was not chaotic. It was dense and warm and completely deliberate. At the workbench, Dara was working on an engine part that Fenn did not recognize. She was bent over it with a small tool, and her attention was the kind that does not notice anything outside its own radius. On her shoulder, sitting with its tail curled around her collar and its wings folded back, and its head tilted slightly to one side, was a creature roughly the size of Fenn's hand, with iridescent scales and large amber eyes, who was carefully painting a small heart on the collar of Dara's jacket. The creature did not rush. It worked with the focused care of someone who has done this many times and still considers each one worth doing right. The brush it used was thin and slightly curved at the tip. The compound on the brush glowed before it touched the fabric and kept glowing after. Rono came up beside Fenn in the corridor. He had been showing Fenn the station and had realized, somewhere around the junction with Corridor 11, that he had lost him. "You found it," Rono said. Fenn looked at the workshop and then at Rono. "What is it?" "That's Dara. She does the mechanical work on this station, best in the sector." Rono leaned against the corridor wall. "The other one is Pip, Velkin companion animal, bonded to Dara about a year ago." Fenn watched Pip finish the heart on Dara's collar and sit back to examine her work. "The hearts are from the dragon." "All of them has been since the beginning." Rono crossed his arms. "Velkin companion creatures mark the space and the person they're bonded to. It's a declaration according to their culture. Means the space is protected. Means someone in it has been chosen." Fenn counted without meaning to, and then stopped counting because the number was getting large. Doesn't it bother her, all of this on everything she uses? Rona was quiet for a moment. He looked through the open door at the workshop, at Dara still bent over her work, at Pip now moving from the collar to examine a small section of bare tool handle with a critical expression. "You know what's funny," he said. "About 2 months ago, Dara repainted the whole workshop, every surface. Fresh gray primer, 2 coats. She spent a whole weekend on it. Did the floor, the walls, the workbench, the ceiling, everything. When she was done, the whole room was clean and blank. not a single mark left. Finn looked at the walls, at the hundreds of glowing hearts. "What happened to the clean walls?" he asked. Rono smiled. "Pip happened." Inside the workshop, Dara set down her tool. She reached up, not looking away from the engine part, not breaking her attention, and with one grease-darkened finger she scratched Pip very gently under the chin. Pip went still, the tail stopped, the brush lowered, the amber eyes half-closed in the way that meant, in whatever language small things with iridescent scales and very large feelings used, something like this. "Right here. This is the whole thing." The sound that followed was small and deep and even. A steady rumble from something no bigger than a hand, like a very distant engine running smooth and warm and without any faults at all. The workshop glowed red around them. Fenn stood in the corridor for another moment, looking in at a mechanic who was not a sentimental person and a small creature who had decided that did not matter, in a room that had been repainted gray and then refilled with love because that was, apparently, the only ending this story had ever been able to have. Then Rono tapped him on the shoulder and said there was still half the station to see, and they went. Inside, Dara picked up her tool and went back to work. Pip picked up the brush and went back to work too. The hearts glowed on every wall and would go on glowing, and that was more than